Liam Hawthorne had wealth, power, and privilege, but not purpose. When a plan to humiliate a maid's daughter backfires, he's forced to confront the emptiness of his life. Can he and Izzy, a fiercely independent woman, transform their worlds together? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun bounced off the polished marble floors of the Hawthorne estate as Liam Hawthorne walked down the grand staircase. He didn't bother looking at the maids cleaning nearby. They were just part of the background of his privileged life, like the expensive paintings on the walls. "Good morning, Mr. Hawthorne," one of the maids said quietly. Liam barely nodded, focused on checking his phone messages about tonight's party. At 28, he had perfected the art of throwing the most talked-about events in town. His parties at the estate were legendary, filled with the children of CEOs, politicians, and old money families. "James," Liam called out to the butler, "make sure they're setting up the tent by the pool and tell the chef I want that caviar I had in Paris last month." James appeared quickly, his grey hair neatly combed and his uniform spotless. "Right. Away, sir. Also, your father called. He'd like to speak with you about the hotel chain's expansion." Liam waved his hand dismissively. "Tell him I'm busy with the party preparations. He can talk to me tomorrow." He walked into the kitchen where staff members were rushing around getting ready for the evening. That's when he first heard about her. "Did you hear? Rosa's daughter got another scholarship," one of the kitchen helpers whispered to another. "Full ride to business school. Smart girl, that Isabel." "Izzy's always been different," another maid joined in. "Works 3 jobs and still gets top grades. Rosa must be so proud." Liam pretended to check his phone while listening. Rosa Rivera had been their head maid for years. He vaguely remembered seeing her daughter around the estate sometimes, helping out during summer breaks. The conversation gave him an idea, the kind of idea that came easily to someone who had never faced real consequences for his actions. "Where's Rosa?" he asked suddenly, making the kitchen staff jump. "In the garden, sir," one of them answered quickly. "Organizing the flower arrangements for tonight." Liam found Rosa among the roses, her hands carefully arranging white flowers in elegant vases. She stood up quickly when she saw him approach. "Mr. Hawthorne, is everything all right?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Rosa, I didn't know your daughter was doing so well in school," Liam said, flashing his famous charming smile. "You must be very proud." Rosa's face lit up. "Yes, sir. My Izzy, she works very hard. She should come to the party tonight," Liam said casually. "It would be good for her to meet some people, make connections. That's important in business, right?" Rosa's eyes widened. "Oh, sir, that's very kind. But Izzy, she's working tonight." "I insist," Liam said, already typing on his phone. "Tell her it's a special invitation from me. Everyone who's anyone will be there." After Rosa thanked him profusely, Liam walked back to the house, a smirk playing on his lips. He opened his group chat with his closest friends. "Got a surprise for tonight's party," he typed. "The maid's daughter is coming. Little Miss Scholarship thinks she can play in our league." The responses came quickly. "OMG, this is going to be hilarious." "Vanessa, poor thing won't know what hit her." "Blake, you're evil, Liam." "I love it." Madison Liam spent the rest of the day overseeing party preparations and getting ready. He chose an expensive black suit, had his dark hair perfectly styled, and made sure everything was set for what he thought would be an entertaining evening at someone else's expense. By 7, the estate was transformed. Strings of lights twinkled in the gardens, music flowed through hidden speakers, and waiters moved smoothly through the growing crowd with trays of champagne and expensive appetizers. "This is going to be epic," Blake said, joining Liam by the pool. "When's our special guest arriving?" "Rosa said she'd be here by 8, Liam answered, adjusting his gold watch. "I told her mother it was a fancy dress event. Can't wait to see what she shows up in." Vanessa, stunning in a red designer dress, joined them. "I already have the perfect plan. I'll pretend to trip and spill my drink all over her. It'll be priceless." The 3 of them laughed, clinking their champagne glasses. None of them noticed Rosa watching from a distance, her heart heavy, as she realized she might have made a terrible mistake encouraging her daughter to come. At exactly 8 o'clock, a hush fell over the crowd near the entrance. Liam turned, expecting to see something amusing. Instead, his champagne glass nearly slipped from his hand. Isabel Rivera stood in the doorway, but she looked nothing like the quiet girl he remembered glimpsing around the estate. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more elegant than all the designer outfits around her. Her dark hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made several heads turn. "That's the maid's daughter," Blake whispered, clearly shocked. Liam couldn't answer. He watched as Izzy smiled and thanked the waiter who offered her champagne. There was something different about her, something real that stood out among the fake laughs and practiced poses of his usual crowd. "Well," Vanessa said sharply, "this isn't exactly what we planned, is it?" But Liam barely heard her. He was too busy watching Izzy move through the crowd, stopping to admire a painting here, engage in conversation there. She didn't try to fit in or stand out. She simply existed in the space as herself. "I'm going to go introduce myself," he found himself saying. "What? That wasn't the plan." Vanessa grabbed his arm. "We were supposed to—" "Plans change," Liam said, pulling away from her grip. He straightened his tie and walked toward Izzy, his heart beating unusually fast. He had no way of knowing that this moment, this simple decision to walk across a room, would change everything he thought he knew about himself, about life, and about what really matters. The party was just beginning, and with it a story that would shake the foundations of Liam Hawthorne's carefully constructed world. In the kitchen, Rosa lit a candle in front of the small statue of the Virgin Mary she kept hidden behind the spice rack. "Please," she whispered in Spanish, "protect my daughter tonight." She didn't know whether to pray for Izzy to succeed or for her to leave before anyone could hurt her. Sometimes, Rosa thought, the hardest part of being a mother was not knowing which outcome would be better for your child. Liam made his way through the crowd, noticing how people seemed drawn to Izzy, despite not knowing who she was. She stood near one of the large windows, talking to an older gentleman who Liam recognized as one of his father's business partners. "The hotel industry is fascinating," Izzy was saying, "especially the way it's adapting to changes in consumer behavior after the pandemic." The businessman nodded approvingly. "You seem very knowledgeable about the subject, young lady." "I did my thesis on hospitality management during economic transitions," Izzy explained simply. "It's an interesting case study." Liam cleared his throat as he approached. "I hope you're enjoying the party, Miss Rivera." Izzy turned to face him, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Hawthorne, thank you for the invitation. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about why you extended it." The businessman excused himself, leaving them alone. Liam found himself struggling to maintain his usual smooth demeanor. There was something about the direct way she looked at him that made his rehearsed charm feel hollow. "Can't I invite a bright young business student to network with our guests?" he asked, flashing his signature smile. "You've never shown any interest in your staff's families before," Izzy pointed out. "In fact, I don't think you've ever said more than 2 words to my mother, and she's worked here for 15 years. Liam felt a strange sensation in his stomach, something like guilt. He pushed it away. "Maybe I'm turning over a new leaf, or maybe," Izzy said quietly. This invitation had other intentions. Before Liam could respond, Vanessa appeared, at his side, deliberately bumping into Izzy with a full glass of red wine. But Izzy, as if anticipating the move, stepped smoothly aside. The wine splashed onto the marble floor instead. "Oh dear," Izzy said calmly. "You should be more careful. These floors are slippery." She grabbed a napkin from a passing waiter and handed it to a fuming Vanessa. "Here, let me help you clean." "That up!" Whispers and subtle laughter rippled through the nearby guests. Vanessa's face turned as red as her dress. "How dare you?" Vanessa hissed. "Do you know who I am?" "Vanessa Montgomery," Izzy replied evenly. "Your father's company is facing a class action lawsuit for environmental violations, and your family's trying to keep it out of the press. I read about it in my business ethics class." The whispers grew louder. Vanessa stormed off, leaving Liam staring at Izzy with a mixture of shock and something else. Respect, maybe. "That was impressive," he admitted. "No, it was sad," Izzy corrected him. "Is this really how you spend your evenings? Planning little dramas to entertain yourselves?" Her words hit him harder than he expected. "You don't know anything about my life." "I know enough," she said. "I've watched you and your friends from the sidelines for years, always taking, never giving, acting like the world owes you something, just because you were born into privilege. And I suppose you think you're better than us." Liam felt defensive, but also strangely eager to keep the conversation going. "No," Izzy said softly. "I just choose to be better than what people expect of me. Maybe you should try it sometime." The orchestra began playing a waltz. Around them, couples moved onto the dance floor. "Dance with me," Liam said suddenly, surprising himself. Izzy raised an eyebrow. Why? Because everyone's watching, and you're obviously trying to teach me a lesson about assumptions and prejudice. So teach me, unless you don't know how to waltz." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "I learned from YouTube videos while practicing in my mum's kitchen. Think you can keep up?" She took his offered hand, and Liam led her onto the dance floor. He was used to leading partners who danced mechanically, following steps they'd learned in expensive classes. Izzy danced with natural grace, her movements fluid and unpracticed. "You're full of surprises," Liam murmured as they moved across the floor. "And you're not as good at hiding your real self as you think," she replied. "I saw your face when I walked in. You were expecting something else." "I was," he admitted. "I was being a jerk. I was going to say misguided." Izzy laughed, a genuine sound that made several heads turn. "Fancy word for a simple truth, Mr. Hawthorne." As they danced, Liam found himself noticing little things about her. The way her eyes crinkled slightly when she smiled, how she bit her lower lip when concentrating on the steps, the subtle scent of jasmine in her hair. In the kitchen, Rosa watched through the serving window, her hands clasped together. "Dios mio," she whispered. "This isn't what I expected." Next to her, James the butler nodded. "Neither did anyone else, Rosa, but perhaps that's a good thing." Meanwhile, Vanessa had gathered Blake and the others in a corner. "This isn't over," she seethed. "That scholarship charity case thinks she can humiliate me? We need to show her where she really belongs." "I don't know," Blake said, watching Liam and Izzy dance. "Maybe we should just let it go. They actually look good together." "Good together?" Vanessa's voice rose. "Have you lost your mind? She's the help's daughter. And Liam's just confused. You'll see. By the end of this night, Isabel Rivera will wish she never stepped foot in this house." Back on the dance floor, Liam and Izzy continued their waltz, unaware of the plotting happening in the corner. But as they danced, something was shifting in the air around them. Old prejudices wrestling with new feelings, pride battling with attraction, and two people from very different worlds discovering that maybe, just maybe, they had more to learn from each other than either had imagined. The night was still young, and in the world of the Hawthorne estate, anything could happen before the last dance ended. As the waltz ended, Liam reluctantly let go of Izzy's hand. The room felt different somehow. The crystal chandeliers a little too bright, the music a little too loud, the laughter of his friends a little too forced. "I need some air," Izzy said, already turning toward the terrace doors. "I'll join you," Liam replied quickly, ignoring Vanessa's glare from across the room. The night air was cool and sweet, with the scent of jasmine from the garden. They stood at the marble railing, looking out over the perfectly manicured grounds of the estate. For a moment, neither spoke. "Why did you really invite me tonight?" Izzy finally asked, turning to face him. The truth this time. Liam opened his mouth to give another smooth excuse, but something in her steady gaze made him stop. "I wanted to embarrass you," he admitted. "I thought it would be entertaining." "At least you're honest," Izzy said quietly, "though I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse." Before Liam could respond, a commotion broke out inside. They turned to see Rosa hurrying through the crowd, her uniform stained with what looked like red wine. Vanessa stood nearby, an empty glass in her hand. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Vanessa said loudly, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You should watch where you're going next time. Servants should know their place." Izzy started forward, but Liam grabbed her arm. "Wait," he said. "Let me handle this." He strode into the ballroom, his face hard with anger. "Vanessa, that's enough." "What?" Vanessa laughed. "Since when do you care about the help? Don't tell me one dance with the maid's daughter has turned you soft." The room had gone quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what Liam would do. He felt the weight of their expectations, the unspoken rules of their privileged world pressing down on him. "Mrs. Rivera has worked for my family for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "She deserves respect, and if you can't show that respect, you can leave." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face turned white with shock, then red with fury. "You can't be serious," she sputtered. "Over a maid? Security will show you out," Liam said firmly. He turned to Rosa. "Mrs. Rivera, please take the rest of the night off. With full pay, of course." Rosa nodded, her eyes wide with surprise. As she turned to leave, she caught Izzy's eye and gave a small, proud smile. Back on the terrace, Izzy studied Liam's face. That was unexpected. "Maybe I'm full of surprises too," he said. "Or maybe," she suggested, That's who you really are when you stop trying to impress people who don't matter. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard Hawthorne, Liam's father. He stood in the terrace doorway, his silver hair gleaming in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "Son," he said coldly, "a word." Liam followed his father into the study, leaving Izzy alone on the terrace. The study door closed with a heavy thud. "Have you lost your mind?" Richard demanded. "Throwing out Vanessa Montgomery? Her father sits on our board. She was being cruel to our staff," Liam argued. "Staff?" Richard laughed harshly. "Since when do you care about staff? This is about that girl, isn't it? The maid's daughter. Her name is Isabel," Liam said through gritted teeth. "I don't care what her name is," Richard snapped. "You have responsibilities, Liam. A position to maintain. The Hawthorne name means something in this city." "Maybe it's time it meant something different," Liam suggested quietly. Richard's face hardened. "I've worked too hard building this empire. To watch you throw it away over some girl from the wrong side of the tracks. Fix this now." Meanwhile, on the terrace, Blake had approached Izzy. "You should leave," he said, not unkindly. "You're causing trouble you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Izzy replied. "You're all so afraid of anything real that you'd rather live in your artificial little bubble than face the truth about yourselves." "You don't belong here," Blake insisted. "Maybe none of us do," she said. "Maybe this whole world you've built is just a beautiful lie." Inside the study, the argument between father and son was escalating. "You have two choices," Richard said coldly. "End whatever this is with that girl and apologize to Vanessa, or I'll cut off your trust fund and remove you from the company board." Liam felt like he'd been slapped. "You'd do that, your own son, to protect this family's legacy?" In a heartbeat, Richard moved to the door. "You have until midnight to make your decision. Choose wisely." As Richard left, Liam sank into a leather chair, his head in his hands. Through the window he could see Izzy still standing on the terrace, her face turned up to the stars. She looked so out of place in his world, and yet, somehow, she was the only thing that felt real. In the kitchen, Rosa was changing out of her stained uniform when James brought her a cup of tea. "Things are changing," the old butler observed. "For better or worse?" Rosa asked. "That depends," James replied thoughtfully, "on whether your daughter and the young master are strong enough to fight for what's real." The party continued in the ballroom, but the music couldn't quite cover the whispers and speculation. Everyone had seen Liam defend the maid, had watched him follow that scholarship girl around like a lost puppy. By tomorrow, it would be all over the society pages. And in the middle of it all, two young people from different worlds stood at a crossroads, neither quite sure of the path ahead, but both feeling the weight of this moment. It was barely 10 o'clock, 2 hours until midnight, 2 hours until Liam had to make a choice that would change everything. The night wasn't over yet, and in the world of the Hawthorns, 2 hours could feel like a lifetime or a heartbeat, depending on which side of midnight you were standing on. The clock in the grand hallway struck 11, each chime echoing through the mansion like a warning. Liam stood in his father's study, staring at the family portraits on the wall. Generations of Hawthorns looked down at him with stern expressions, as if judging his every move. Outside, Vanessa hadn't left as ordered. Instead, she'd gathered a group of guests in the garden, her voice carrying through the open windows. "Can you believe it?" she was saying. "The help's daughter thinks she can just walk in here and turn Liam's head? Please, I've known him since we were children. This is just another one of his rebellious phases." In the kitchen, Rosa was still there despite being told to go home. She couldn't leave, not with her daughter in the middle of all this. She was brewing coffee when Izzy found her. "Mama, you should be resting," Izzy said, hugging her mother. "Mi hija," Rosa said softly. "What are you doing? These people, this world, it's not for us." "I'm not trying to be part of their world," Izzy replied. I think Liam might be different, when he's allowed to be himself." Rosa touched her daughter's cheek. "Different or not, loving someone like him comes with a price. Are you ready to pay it?" Before Izzy could answer, Blake appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Izzy, can we talk?" Rosa squeezed her daughter's hand and stepped away, leaving them alone. Blake looked uncomfortable in the kitchen, like a fish out of water. "Look," he said, "I've known Liam forever. He's my best friend, and I've never seen him like this before." "Is this where you warn me to stay away from him?" Izzy asked. "Actually, no." Blake surprised her with a genuine smile. "This is where I tell you that you might be the best thing that's ever happened to him. But Richard Hawthorne, he's not going to make it easy." What do you mean? He's given Liam until midnight to choose. You or his inheritance. Everything. The money. His position in the company. All of it. Izzy felt her heart sink. He shouldn't have to make that choice. No, Blake agreed, he shouldn't. But that's the world we live in. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Meanwhile, Liam had escaped to his childhood bedroom on the 3rd floor. Everything was exactly as he'd left it years ago. Trophies lining the shelves. Photos of him with his friends at boarding school. The model cars he used to collect. It all seemed so shallow now. So meaningless. He picked up a photo of himself with his father at his college graduation. They were both smiling, but he remembered how staged it had felt, how his father had been more concerned with the photographers than the actual moment. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was James, the butler, carrying a small, wooden box. "Your mother asked me to give you this if there ever came a time when you needed to make an important choice," James said, placing the box on the desk. Inside was a letter and a simple silver bracelet. Liam recognized it. His mother had worn it every day before she passed away 5 years ago. The letter was short. "My darling son, there will come a time when you'll have to choose between what the world expects of you and what your heart knows is right. Your father and I made different choices when faced with this moment. He chose the empire. I chose love. I've never regretted it, even though it cost me my place in society. The bracelet belonged to my grandmother, who made the same choice. Wear it when you need strength to be true to yourself. All my love, Mom." Liam's hands shook as he held the bracelet. He'd never known this story about his mother. "She was a remarkable woman," James said quietly. "Much like Miss Isabel, actually." They both saw beyond the surface of things. Downstairs, the party was starting to wind down. Those who remained were gathered in small groups, whispering about the night's events. Vanessa had managed to rally some supporters, mostly those whose positions depended on Richard Hawthorne's good graces. Izzy stood alone by the grand piano, her fingers lightly touching the keys. She played a few notes of a simple melody, a lullaby her mother used to sing. "I didn't know you played," Liam said, appearing beside her. "There's a lot you don't know about me," she replied without looking up. "I want to learn," he said softly. "If you'll let me." Izzy finally turned to face him. "Blake told me about your father's ultimatum." "Of course he did." Liam managed a small smile. "Izzy, I don't," she interrupted. "Don't make promises you can't keep. This is your world, Liam, your life, your family's legacy. I won't be the reason you lose all that." "What if I want to lose it?" he asked. "What if I'm tired of being the person everyone expects me to be?" "Then make that choice for yourself," Izzy said firmly. "Not for me." The clock struck 11:30. In his office, Richard Hawthorne poured himself a drink and waited. He was certain his son would make the right choice. The Hawthorne name had survived for generations because they always chose power over passion, stability over sentiment. In the kitchen, Rosa lit another candle and prayed, not for any particular outcome, but for her daughter to be strong enough to handle whatever came next. And in the ballroom, as the remaining guests pretended not to watch, Liam and Izzy stood at the piano, the weight of the next 30 minutes hanging between them like an invisible wall. "Dance with me again," Liam said suddenly. "There's no music," Izzy pointed out. Liam sat at the piano. To everyone's surprise, he began to play, not perfectly, but with feeling. It was the same lullaby Izzy had been touching on earlier. "My mother taught me," he explained. "It was our secret. Father thought music lessons were a waste of time." Izzy felt tears prick at her eyes. In that moment, she saw him clearly. Not the privileged heir, not the charming playboy, but just a man trying to break free from the golden cage he'd been born into. The melody filled the room, drowning out the whispers and judgment. For a few precious minutes, there was no midnight deadline, no class divide, no family expectations. There was just music and two people standing on the edge of something that could either break them or make them whole. But midnight was coming, and with it, a choice that would change everything. The question wasn't just whether Liam would choose love or money. It was whether he would finally choose to be himself, whatever the cost. 11:45. The grand ballroom was nearly empty now, with only the most invested guests remaining to see how the drama would unfold. Vanessa stood with her group near the French doors, watching Liam like a hawk. Blake hovered nearby, torn between loyalty to his oldest friend and the world they'd grown up in. 15 minutes, Vanessa announced loudly. "I wonder if Liam will make the right choice, or if he'll throw away everything for a girl who probably won't even be here next." Weak, Liam sat at the piano, his mother's silver bracelet now wrapped around his wrist. Each time the metal caught the light, he felt a surge of strength. Izzy had moved to stand by the windows, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the ornate curtains behind her. Richard Hawthorne emerged from his study, walking with the confidence of a man who had never lost a battle. He approached his son at the piano. "Time's almost up," he said quietly. "I assume you've come to your senses." Before Liam could answer, the main doors burst open. Marcus Montgomery, Vanessa's father, and one of the most powerful men in the Yay City, stormed in, his face red with anger. "Richard," he bellowed, "what's this I hear about your son humiliating my daughter?" The room went silent. Even the waiters stopped clearing glasses to watch. "Marcus," Richard said smoothly, "let's discuss this in private." "No," Marcus thundered. "My family has been partners with the Hawthorns for 3 generations. And this is how we're treated because of some maid's daughter?" Izzy stepped forward, her head held high. "Mr. Montgomery, your daughter deliberately spilled wine on my mother's uniform and tried to humiliate her in front of everyone. If anyone should be upset about treatment, it's us." "Us?" Marcus laughed coldly. "There is no us in this world, young lady. Know your place." "That's enough." Liam's voice cut through the tension. He stood up from the piano, his father's face darkening as he noticed the bracelet on his wrist. "Where did you get that?" Richard demanded. "Mom left it for me," Liam said, "along with some truth about our family that you never bothered to share." Rosa appeared in the doorway, still in her stained uniform. She moved to stand beside her daughter, her presence adding strength to Izzy's stance. "Mrs. Rivera," Liam said formally, "I want to apologize for how you were treated tonight. You've served this family faithfully for 15 years, and you deserve better." "Liam," his father warned, "think very carefully about what you're doing." The old grandfather clock in the hall began to chime. Midnight. "I have thought about it," Liam said. "For the first time in my life, I'm really thinking." He turned to face the room. "All of you have known me my whole life. You've watched me waste time and money, chase empty relationships and play the role of the spoiled heir. And you approved, because that's what people like us are supposed to do." Vanessa stepped forward. "Liam, don't be dramatic. Just apologize. And we can all move past this silly evening." "Silly?" Liam's laugh was bitter. "That's what we call cruelty now. Just silly fun?" He looked at his father. "Did you know Mom gave up her family's fortune to marry you? That her parents cut her off because they thought you were beneath them?" Richard's face went pale. "That was different." "How?" Liam challenged. "Because you had money. Because you came from the right family. You're doing exactly what was done to you and Mom, but you're too proud to see it." The clock finished its 12 chimes. Midnight had arrived. "Time's up, Marcus," Montgomery said with satisfaction. "Make your choice, boy." Liam looked at Izzy standing proud beside her mother, then at Blake, who gave him a slight nod of encouragement, at James the butler, who had served his family through 3 generations and knew all their secrets. Finally at his father, who stood rigid with anger and fear that his son might choose a different path. "You want me to choose?" Liam said quietly. "Okay, I choose to be more than what you've made me. I choose to be the kind of person who stands up for what's right, who values people for who they are, not what they own." He unclipped his Rolex and placed it on the piano. "I choose to find out who I am without all of this." "Don't be a fool," Richard growled. "You've never worked a day in your life. You won't last a week without your trust fund." "Maybe not," Liam agreed. "But I'd rather fail trying to be someone real than succeed at being fake." He turned to Izzy. "I'm not doing this for you. You were right. I need to do this for myself, but you made me see that I had a choice." Izzy's eyes shone with tears and pride. "What will you do now?" "I don't know," Liam admitted. "For the first time in my life, I don't have everything planned out, and it feels right." "This is ridiculous," Vanessa spat. "Daddy, do something." But Marcus Montgomery was looking at Liam with an odd expression, something almost like respect. "Let him go," he said suddenly. "Sometimes a man needs to find his own way." "Marcus," Richard protested, "you can't be serious." "I am." Marcus straightened his tie. "Maybe it's time for some changes in how we do things, starting with how we treat people." He turned to Rosa. "Mrs. Rivera, I apologize for my daughter's behavior. It won't happen again." Vanessa's mouth fell open in shock. Her father had never apologized to anyone, let alone a maid. The remaining guests began to whisper among themselves. The story was already changing. Not a scandal about a rich heir throwing everything away, but a tale of principles and courage. "James," Liam called out, "could you help me pack a few things?" The old butler smiled. "Already done, sir. There's a bag waiting in your car." Richard Hawthorne looked at his son, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. "You're really doing this?" "Yes," Liam said simply, "and maybe someday you'll understand why." He walked to Izzy and took her hand. "I don't expect anything from you, but I'd like the chance to get to know you. The real you, not just the girl from tonight." "I work 3 jobs and study full-time," Izzy warned. "I don't have time for games." "Good," Liam smiled, "because I'm done playing them." As they walked out of the ballroom together, followed by Rosa's proud smile and Richard's stunned silence, the night air seemed fresher somehow. The stars shone brighter, and somewhere, Liam thought he could feel his mother smiling down on him, her silver bracelet warm against his skin. The choice had been made. The old life was over, and something new, something real was just beginning. The morning after the party, Liam woke up in a small hotel room instead of his luxury suite at the estate. The bed was hard, the coffee maker was broken, and the view from his window showed a parking lot instead of manicured gardens. But somehow he felt lighter than he had in years. His phone had been buzzing non-stop since last night. Messages from his father's lawyers, texts from society friends either condemning or congratulating him, and countless notifications about news articles already covering the scandal. He turned it off and tossed it on the bedside table. Meanwhile, Izzy was starting her morning shift at the local coffee shop, one of her 3 jobs. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Blake walking in. "Don't worry," he said, raising his hands in surrender. "I come in peace. Just wanted to see how you're doing after everything." "I'm fine," Izzy said, already starting. His order. She'd seen him come here before, though he'd never acknowledged her until now. "Large Americano with an extra shot, right?" Blake looked surprised. "You remember my order?" "I remember everyone's orders. It's my job." She handed him the coffee. "How's Liam?" "That's actually why I'm here," Blake admitted. "Nobody's heard from him since last night. We're worried." "We?" Izzy raised an eyebrow. "Okay, I'm worried," Blake corrected himself. "Look, I've known Liam since we were kids. He's never been on his own before, never had to work, never had to worry about money. I want to make sure he's okay." At that moment, Liam himself walked into the coffee shop. He was wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, probably the most casual clothes he owned. He stopped short when he saw Blake. "Following me?" Liam asked. "Someone has to make sure you don't starve," Blake joked, but his eyes were concerned. Izzy watched their interaction while making drinks for other customers. She could see the genuine friendship between them, underneath all the social expectations and class divisions. "I'm fine," Liam said. "Actually, I'm better than fine. I just had my first job interview." Both Blake and Izzy stared at him. "You? A job interview?" Blake couldn't hide his shock. "Where?" "The Downtown Youth Center," Liam replied. "They need someone to help manage their programs. I figured, well, I do have a business degree, even if I've never used it properly." "Did you get it?" Izzy asked softly. "They said they'll let me know," Liam shrugged. "But even if I don't, I'll keep trying. That's what normal people do, right?" Back at the Hawthorne estate, Richard sat in his study, staring at an old photo of his wife. She would have been proud of Liam's choice, he knew, but all he could see was years of careful planning crumbling away. "Sir?" James entered with the morning papers. "You might want to see these." The headlines varied. "Hawthorne heir gives up. Fortune for love. Billionaire's son stands up to privilege. A modern fairy tale, wealth versus worth." "The public seems quite taken with the story," James observed carefully, "especially young people. The company's social media mentions are up 200% since last night." Richard frowned. "What are they saying?" "They're calling it inspiring, sir. A rich young man choosing integrity over wealth. It's resonating with people." Before Richard could respond, Marcus Montgomery burst into the study. "Have you seen the headlines?" Marcus demanded. "This could actually work in our favor. The younger generation is all about authenticity and social responsibility. Your son just gave the Hawthorne. Name something money can't buy, relatability." Richard stared at his old friend. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious," Marcus replied. "Times are changing, Richard. Maybe Liam saw it before we did." At the coffee shop, the morning rush was ending. Liam had stayed, awkwardly trying to figure out how to order coffee, like a regular person. Blake had left for work, promising to check in later. "You don't have to do this, you know," Izzy said as she wiped down the counter. "Try to live like a regular person. It's not a game." "I know it's not," Liam replied. But I want to understand your world. Really understand it, not just watch from a distance. My world isn't very glamorous, she warned. After this shift, I have classes all afternoon. Then I work at the library until closing. Most days I'm too tired to even eat dinner. Then let me help, Liam said quickly. Not with money, I don't have access to that anymore anyway, but maybe I could, I don't know, bring you dinner sometimes or help you study. Izzy looked at him thoughtfully. You really want to do this? Date a girl who has to work 3 jobs to get through school? I want to date Izzy Rivera, Liam said simply. The girl who reads to sick kids at the hospital on her 1 free day a week. The girl who helps her mom clean houses to make extra money for her brother's college fund. The girl who made me want to be better. How do you know all that? I asked around, he admitted. After you left last night. Turns out the staff knows everything about everyone. They've been watching you. Work hard your whole life while people like me took everything for granted. Just then Liam's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. It was the youth center. Hello? He answered nervously. Izzy watched his face as he listened. When he hung up, he looked stunned. Well? She asked. I got it, he said in disbelief. They want me to start Monday. The pay is barely enough to cover that cheap hotel room, but it's a start, Izzy finished for him. She smiled. Welcome to the real world, Mr. Hawthorne. Thanks, Miss Rivera, he grinned. Then his face fell slightly. Though I might need some advice about, well, everything. I tried to do laundry this morning and I think I turned all my white shirts pink. Izzy couldn't help laughing. Meet me at the laundromat on 6th Street after my library shift. I'll teach you the basics of surviving on your own. As Liam left the coffee shop, he passed Rosa, who was arriving to talk to her daughter. They exchanged awkward nods. Mihija, Rosa said once he was gone. Are you sure about this? No, Izzy admitted, but I'm sure about giving him a chance to prove himself. He's trying, Mama. Really trying. Rosa touched the coffee-stained uniform she still wore from last night. People don't change overnight, Isabel. No, Izzy agreed, but sometimes they just need a reason to be who they really are. Outside, the city was waking up to a new day. Somewhere in his empty mansion, Richard Hawthorne was realizing that the world was changing faster than he could control. In her penthouse, Vanessa was plotting her revenge, unable to accept her public humiliation. And in a small coffee shop, 2 people from different worlds were beginning to build something new, something real. The fairy tale was over. Real life was just beginning. And sometimes that's where the true magic happens. 2 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything. Liam sat at his small desk at the downtown youth center, trying to make sense of their budget spreadsheets. His designer watch was gone, replaced by a simple digital one that kept better time anyway. His Italian leather shoes had been traded for comfortable sneakers that could handle walking everywhere now that he didn't have a driver. Mr. Hawthorne? Maria, one of the teenage regulars at the center, poked her head into his office. There's someone here to see you. Liam looked up to find Vanessa standing in his doorway, looking completely out of place in her designer outfit. Nice office, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Very charitable. What do you want, Vanessa? Liam asked tiredly. Just thought you'd like to know what's happening with your company while you're playing social worker. She dropped a folder on his desk. Your father's been making some interesting moves lately. Liam opened the folder and felt his stomach drop. Documents showed that Richard Hawthorne was selling off parts of the company, parts that had been in the family for generations. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Because despite everything, I care about you, Vanessa said, sitting down uninvited. Your father's destroying your inheritance out of spite. Once you come to your senses and apologize, there might not be anything left to come back to. Meanwhile, Izzy was having her own problems. She sat in her advanced business ethics class, trying to focus, while her classmates whispered and pointed. Everyone knew who. She was now the girl who stole the Hawthorne heir. Miss Rivera, her professor called out, perhaps you'd like to share your thoughts on the case study about ethical responsibilities in family businesses. Some students snickered. Izzy took a deep breath and stood up. Actually, I would, she said firmly. I think the case study shows how personal ethics often conflict with business traditions. Sometimes doing the right thing means sacrificing financial gain for moral growth. Interesting perspective, the professor nodded. And would you say that applies to all situations, even when millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs are at stake? Before Izzy could answer, her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Emergency. Come home now. She found Rosa sitting at their small kitchen table, looking worried. Their landlord, Mr. Peterson, stood nearby with a smug expression. "What's going on?" Izzy asked. "Tell her," Rosa said quietly. "Rent's going up," Peterson announced. "Double what you're paying now. Property values in this neighborhood have increased significantly since your association with the Hawthorne family became public." "You can't do that," Izzy protested. "Actually, I can, and I am," he smiled unpleasantly. "Unless, of course, your new boyfriend wants to help out." "Liam's not my boyfriend," Izzy said automatically, "and we don't want his help." After Peterson left, Rosa looked at her daughter. "Maybe we should accept help, Mihiha. Pride won't pay the rent." "No, Mama. We'll figure something out. I can pick up more hours at the coffee shop." But they both knew she was already working as much as she could while maintaining her scholarship requirements. At the youth center, Liam was still staring at the documents Vanessa had left when his phone rang. It was Blake. "Have you seen the news?" Blake asked without preamble. "About my father selling off the company?" "Yeah, Vanessa just told me." "No, not that. About the youth center's funding." Liam quickly pulled up the local news website. His heart sank as he read the headline, "City Council cuts funding for youth programs." "The timing seems suspicious, doesn't it?" Blake said carefully. "Right after you started working there?" Liam thought of Maria and the other kids who depended on the center. "My father couldn't he?" Blake asked softly. "You know how he operates. He's sending you a message." That evening, Liam waited outside the library for Izzy's shift to end. They had fallen into a routine. He'd walk her home, they'd grab cheap takeout and sometimes study together. It was simple, but it felt more real than any luxury date he'd ever been on. "You look troubled," Izzy said as soon as she saw him. "The youth center might have to close," he admitted. "Budget cuts." "Your father?" "Probably." He kicked at a stone on the sidewalk. "He's also selling off pieces of the company. Vanessa thinks he's doing it to punish me." "Vanessa came to see you." Izzy's voice was carefully neutral. "She's trying to convince me to apologize and come back." Liam looked at her. "I won't, but I feel responsible for what's happening. People could lose their jobs because of me." They walked in silence for a while. Finally, Izzy spoke. "Our rent just doubled. The landlord thinks he can squeeze more money out of us because of everything that happened." "Let me help," Liam said immediately. "I still have my personal savings." "No," Izzy said firmly. "That's your emergency fund. You need it." They reached her building and stood awkwardly at the entrance. So much had changed in 2 weeks, but some things remained complicated. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Liam tried to joke. "A broke billionaire and an overworked student, both too stubborn to take the easy way out." "There is no easy way out," Izzy replied. "Just the right way through." Upstairs in her apartment, Rosa was on the phone with James, the Hawthorne butler. They had stayed in touch, sharing concerns about their respective charges. "It's getting worse," James was saying. "Mr. Hawthorne is making decisions out of anger. The board is worried, and there are rumors that Miss Montgomery is planning something. Vanessa never could handle losing." Rosa sighed. "How is Liam really doing?" "Better than expected in some ways, worse in others. He's learning, but the world can be cruel to those who try to change." In his hotel room, Liam looked at his dwindling bank account and the stack of resumes he'd sent out, trying to find a second job to help the youth center. His phone kept buzzing with messages from his father's lawyers, each one more threatening than the last. On her side of town, Izzy stared at her class schedule and work hours, trying to figure out how to fit in more shifts without losing her scholarship. Her mother's worried face and the landlord's threats weighed heavily on her mind. And in her luxury apartment, Vanessa smiled as she put the finishing touches on her plan. "If they want a fairy tale," she murmured to herself, "let's give them the ugly stepsisters version." The city lights twinkled outside, indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath them. Sometimes the hardest part of choosing the right path is continuing to walk it when everything and everyone seems to be pushing you in the opposite direction. But then again, nothing worth having comes easily, and sometimes the biggest test isn't making the right choice, it's living with it afterward. The morning headlines hit like a bombshell. Hawthorne heir's girlfriend linked to company fraud. Izzy stared at her phone in disbelief as messages flooded in from classmates and co-workers. The article claimed she had accessed sensitive company information through her mother's position as head maid and passed it to competitors. "It's ridiculous," Liam said when he rushed to the coffee shop. "Everyone knows it's not true." "Do they?" Izzy's hands shook as she wiped down the counter. Your father's lawyers are already calling the university. They're reviewing my scholarship. Vanessa, Liam growled. This has her fingerprints all over it. It doesn't matter who did it, Izzy said quietly. What matters is that it's working. People are looking at me differently. My professor asked me to take a leave of absence until this is sorted out. The coffee shop manager called Izzy into his office. When she came out 10 minutes later, her eyes were red. They're letting me go, she said flatly. Can't have someone accused of corporate espionage handling the register. Liam reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Don't, please. I need to figure this out on my own. Meanwhile, at the Hawthorne estate, Richard sat in his study reviewing the article with his lawyers. The evidence is circumstantial at best, one lawyer admitted, but it's enough to cause problems for the girl. Good, Richard nodded. Sometimes you have to be cruel to be kind. Liam will thank me for this one day. James, serving coffee, noticed something unusual. Richard's hands were shaking slightly as he signed the papers, authorizing the legal action against Izzy. Perhaps the great Richard Hawthorne wasn't as comfortable with his decisions as he pretended to be. At the youth center, Maria and the other teens were packing up their belongings. The funding cuts had forced them to close earlier than expected. Where will you go? Liam asked Maria as she gathered her art supplies. Back to hanging out on the streets, I guess, she shrugged, but her eyes were sad. You tried, Mr. H. Sometimes trying isn't enough. Those words haunted Liam as he walked to his second job, night security at a parking garage. He'd taken it to help with the youth center's expenses, but now that seemed pointless too. His phone buzzed with a message from Blake. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Your father's selling the charitable foundation. All community programs will be shut down. The charitable foundation had been his mother's pride and joy. She had built it from nothing, helping thousands of families over the years. Now it would be dismantled, just to teach him a lesson. In their apartment, Rosa held Izzy as she finally broke down crying. Everything I worked for, Izzy sobbed. All the late nights, the extra jobs, the perfect grades. Gone because of a lie. Not gone, Rosa said firmly. Delayed maybe, challenged yes, but not gone. You are stronger than their lies. Am I? Izzy wiped her eyes. Because right now I feel like that girl they're describing in the papers, someone who doesn't belong in their world, trying to take something that isn't hers. You never wanted their world, Rosa reminded her. You wanted to build your own. The next morning, Vanessa sipped her coffee with satisfaction as she read the latest updates. Her plan was working perfectly. The scandal was growing, with more evidence mysteriously appearing each day, but then Blake walked into her office unannounced. I know what you did, he said without preamble. I have proof. Vanessa's smile didn't waver. Proof of what? Of how you hacked into the company servers, how you planted false evidence, how you're working with Richard to destroy not just Liam and Izzy, but everyone connected to them. Now her smile faded slightly. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. Blake placed a USB drive on her desk. I may be rich and privileged, but I'm not stupid. I've been watching you since the party, recording everything. The question is, what am I going to do with this information? For the first time, Vanessa looked uncertain. At the university, Izzy sat before the scholarship committee, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Miss Rivera, the head of the committee, said gravely, these are serious allegations. They're lies, Izzy said, her voice stronger than she felt. And I can prove it. She pulled out her own file, time-stamped photos, work schedules, class, assignments, evidence that she had been in class or at work during every instance of alleged corporate espionage. I've worked too hard to let anyone take this from me, she said. Check everything, I have nothing to hide. As the committee reviewed her evidence, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo, Vanessa meeting secretly, with Richard Hawthorne dated before the scandal broke. The message read, thought you could use this. B. Across town, Liam stood in front of his father's office building, his mother's silver bracelet gleaming on his wrist. He had spent the night thinking about Maria's words. Sometimes trying isn't enough. Sometimes you have to do more than try. Sometimes you have to fight. He walked past security, they still recognized him, and headed for the boardroom. He could hear his father's voice inside, presenting the plan to sell the charitable foundation. Liam took a deep breath and pushed open the doors. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, he said clearly, I have something you need to hear. Richard's face darkened. This is a closed meeting. Security. No, Marcus Montgomery's voice rang out. Let him speak. I think we all want to hear what young Mr. Hawthorne has to say. The room fell silent, in his cheap suit, with dark circles under. His eyes from working nights, Liam looked nothing like the polished heir they remembered, but somehow he commanded more respect now than he ever had before. You all knew my mother, he began, and you know what this foundation meant to her, what it means to the community. Are you really willing to destroy all that, just because Father can't accept that his son chose integrity over obedience? As he spoke, his phone buzzed. A message from Blake. Got what you need, check your email. Sometimes the darkest moment comes just before dawn, and sometimes when everything seems lost, you find out who your real friends are, and more importantly, who you really are. The next few hours would change everything again, but this time, Liam and Izzy were ready. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what you're really made of, and sometimes the biggest revenge isn't getting even. It's getting better. The boardroom was silent as Liam connected his phone to the presentation screen. Blake's email contained audio recordings, security footage and emails, all showing how Richard and Vanessa had conspired to destroy not just Liam's new life, but Izzy's future as well. This is how the Hawthorne name is being protected? Liam asked, his voice steady. By falsely accusing an innocent student? By closing programs that help children? Is this really what we stand for? Richard stood up, his face red. You have no right to be here. You gave up that right when you walked away. Actually, Marcus Montgomery interrupted, as a major shareholder, he has every right to be here. And I, for one, want to hear more. He turned to Richard. Did you really conspire with my daughter to create false evidence? Before Richard could answer, the boardroom doors opened again. Izzy walked in, followed by Blake and, surprisingly, Vanessa. Tell them, Blake said firmly to Vanessa. Tell them the truth. Vanessa looked around the room, her carefully maintained composure cracking. I did it. I created the false evidence. Mr. Hawthorne knew about it, approved it. We thought if we could destroy her reputation, Liam would come back to save her. We didn't think about who else would get hurt. The board members began to whisper among themselves. Richard sank into his chair, suddenly looking old and tired. The scholarship committee has already exonerated Miss Rivera, Blake announced. And the press will have the real story within the hour. The question is, what are we going to do about the leadership of this company? Marcus stood up. I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Richard Hawthorne's leadership. You can't do this, Richard protested weakly. We already are, another board member said. All those in favor? Hands raised around the table. Richard watched his empire slipping away, just as he had tried to take everything from his son. Wait, Liam said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. Before you vote, I have a different proposal. He walked to his father's chair. All my life you taught me about legacy, about responsibility, but somewhere along the way you forgot what those words really mean. Mom never forgot. She knew that true legacy isn't about money or power. It's about the lives you touch, the good you do. What are you suggesting? Marcus asked. A restructuring, Liam replied. The charitable foundation stays with increased funding. The youth center reopens, along with all other community programs, and leadership of the company. He looked at his father. Stays with you, Dad, but with oversight from a new ethics board, one that includes community representatives. Richard looked up at his son in surprise. You're not taking the company? No, Liam shook his head. I'm building something else, something of my own. He glanced at Izzy. Something real. All those in favor of this alternative proposal? Marcus called out. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, Izzy found Liam in his mother's old office. He was looking at her photo on the wall. You could have taken everything from him, she said softly, like he tried to do to us. That's exactly why I didn't, Liam replied. I don't want to be that kind of person anymore. In the hallway, Vanessa stopped them. I'm sorry, she said, actually sounding sincere. I was jealous, not of you. She looked at Izzy, but of what you have, the way you know who you are. It's never too late to figure that out, Izzy said quietly. Back at the youth center, Maria and the other teens were surprised to find the doors open again. Inside, Blake was setting up new computers. Consider it an investment in the future, he told Liam. Besides, someone needs to teach these kids about cybersecurity. Might as well be the guy who caught Vanessa's scheme. Rosa was waiting at the apartment when Izzy got home. I heard what happened, she said, hugging her daughter. I'm so proud of you. You stood your ground without losing your heart. I learned that from you, Mama. Izzy smiled. By the way, Mr. Peterson called. The rent is going back to normal. Apparently, someone bought the building and changed the policy. Let me guess. Rosa raised an eyebrow. Blake? Actually, no, Izzy laughed. Marcus Montgomery. He said something about investing in communities instead of destroying them. That evening, Richard sat alone in his study, looking at the same photo of his wife that had watched him plot against his own son. I forgot who I was, he said to the photo. I forgot who you wanted me to be, who you wanted him to be. James appeared with his evening coffee. It's never too late to remember, sir. Outside, the city was changing. The story of the Hawthorne heir who chose love over money had evolved into something else. A story about integrity, about growth, about the courage to change and the wisdom to choose mercy over vengeance. At a small diner downtown, Liam and Izzy shared a plate of fries, talking about the future. The youth center needs a new educational program director, Liam mentioned casually. Someone who understands both business and community needs. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Hawthorne? Izzy teased. I'm offering you a partnership, he replied seriously, in every way. Behind the counter, the diner's elderly owner smiled as she watched them. She'd seen a lot of love stories in her 50 years of serving coffee, but this one felt different. This wasn't just about romance. It was about two people who made each other better, who challenged each other to grow. The night was warm, full of possibilities. Sometimes the happy ending isn't about getting everything you wanted, but about discovering what you really need. And sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about falling in love. They're about rising in love, becoming more together than you ever could be apart. 6 months had passed since the day everything changed in the Hawthorne boardroom. The gardens of the estate were once again filled with flowers, but this time they weren't for a society wedding. Instead, simple tables dotted the lawn, each one surrounded by a mix of people that would have been unthinkable half a year ago. Corporate executives sitting with youth-center teens, society matrons chatting with community workers, wealth and working class finding common ground. It was the first annual Hawthorne Foundation community celebration, and at its heart were two people who had changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them. I still can't believe this is real, Izzy said, watching Maria teach a group of board members' children how to paint. The youth center's art program had become so successful that several private schools had asked Maria to run workshops. Better than any fairy tale, Liam replied, his hand finding hers. He still wore his mother's silver bracelet, now accompanied by a simple watch that actually kept better time than his old expensive one. Across the lawn, Richard Hawthorne stood with Marcus Montgomery, both men watching their children. Vanessa had surprised everyone by throwing herself into community service after the scandal, discovering a talent for teaching business skills to underprivileged teens. They're better than us, Marcus observed. This next generation, they understand what we forgot. That true wealth isn't in what you have, Richard nodded, but in what you give. He looked at his son, remembering the angry words they'd exchanged in his study 6 months ago. The path to reconciliation had been slow, but every step had made them both stronger. Rosa approached them, no longer in a maid's uniform, but in an elegant dress suitable for her new position as the Foundation's Community Relations Director. The first class of scholarship students is ready for the ceremony, she announced proudly. The scholarship program had been Liam and Izzy's first joint project, matching funds from the Hawthorne fortune with real-world business mentoring. The result was a program that didn't just pay for education, but created opportunities for genuine growth. Your daughter changed everything, Richard said quietly to Rosa. She changed him, changed all of us. No, Rosa corrected gently. She just showed everyone who they really could be. Near the fountain, Blake was deep in conversation with James the butler, who had become an unexpected advisor in the Foundation's new direction. You know, Blake mused, I used to think being born privileged was the luckiest thing that could happen to someone. Now I realize the real luck is in finding your purpose. James smiled. The best silver, Mr. Blake, isn't the kind you're born with. It's the kind you earn. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn as everyone gathered for the scholarship ceremony. Liam stood at the podium looking out at the faces before him, faces that represented every part of his journey. A year ago, he began, I stood in this garden preparing for what I thought would be the perfect society wedding. I was going to marry someone I didn't love, run a company I didn't understand, and live a life that wasn't really mine. He looked at Izzy, who smiled encouragingly. Instead, I found something real. Not just love, though I found that too, but purpose, understanding, community. And I learned that sometimes the biggest act of courage isn't standing up to your enemies, but standing up for your true self. In the audience, Maria wiped away tears. Next to her, Vanessa sat with a group of her students, her designer clothes replaced by simple business attire that somehow suited her better. Today, we're not just celebrating scholarships, Liam continued. We're celebrating transformation. The transformation of a company from a profit machine to a force for good. The transformation of a community from divided to united. And yes, the transformation of a spoiled heir into someone his mother would have been proud of. Richard bowed his head, remembering his late wife's words about choosing love over empire. She would have loved this moment. After the ceremony, as the sun set over the garden, Liam found Izzy by the piano in the ballroom, the same piano where he'd played her mother's lullaby all those months ago. "Dance with me?" he asked. "There's no music," she pointed out, just as she had that first night. But this time Maria sat down at the piano. The melody she played was the same lullaby, but somehow fuller, richer, like their love had become. As they danced, the rest of the party moved inside, forming a circle around them. But this time there were no whispers, no judgments, just celebration of something real and true. You know," Liam murmured as they danced, "that first night I invited you here to humiliate you. And now?" Izzy asked, her eyes twinkling. "Now I invite you to stay, forever." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not a flashy diamond, but a simple silver band with a pattern that matched his mother's bracelet. "Marry me." The room held its breath. Rosa gripped James's hand. Richard stepped forward unconsciously. Even Vanessa leaned in to hear the answer. Izzy looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, the man who had given up everything to become someone better, the man who had learned that true strength isn't in what you take, but in what you give. "Yes," she said simply, "but not because you're a Hawthorne, because you're Liam. Just Liam." The room erupted in cheers. Maria played the lullaby with extra flourish. Rosa cried happy tears while James pretended he wasn't crying too. And in his study later that night, Richard Hawthorne finally took down his wife's portrait from the wall. He didn't need it anymore to remember what she had tried to teach him. He could see it every day in his son's eyes, in the way the company now operated, in the community they were building. The gardens of the Hawthorne estate had seen many parties, many dramas, many moments of triumph and regret. But none quite like this. A celebration of love that had transformed not just two hearts, but an entire world. Sometimes the greatest legacy isn't what you leave behind, but what you change while you're here. Sometimes the greatest regret isn't what you lose, but what you might have missed if you hadn't been brave enough to change. And sometimes, just sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't about perfect people finding perfect love, but about real people finding their perfect truth. The moon rose over the estate, casting silver light on the garden where it all began. Inside, the celebration continued. Not a society party, but a genuine celebration of community, of growth, of love that transforms. And in the center of it, all two people danced to a lullaby, proving that sometimes the best fairy tales aren't about magical transformations, but about the magic of becoming who you were always meant to be. The end.